So Metro21 Smart Cities Institute, we are campus-wide. Can you go to the next slide? We're campus-wide, but we're housed here in Hamburg Hall, Heinz College, up on the second floor. You know, it's like this hybrid, I'm in and out, but I'm always available by email. I'm old school, I'm an email girl. You will not find me on Slack. I'll tell you that right now. I won't do Slack. And the work that we do is connecting faculty from all 7 colleges plus the libraries and helping solve real world problems using technology as a tool as opposed to a guide. It's very co-creative, collaborative. We work with our community partners in the design, implementation, deployment, and evaluation of projects. Oftentimes, we help them. We are like that little linchpin, that little like enabling piece that makes that connection to a community group, a nonprofit, a government organization. We work around the region. So we started in Pittsburgh. We started with a memo of understanding with the city of Pittsburgh. We expanded to the county. Now we're actually in 3 states. We're working in 56 counties in 3 states. We work really collaboratively, again, using technology as a tool to solve real world problems. We've probably done close to 100 projects by now. Our website is a wealth of information. So I encourage you, we have a newsletter, we have a podcast that I'm woefully horrible at updating. But we are, you know, we do social media, we do Instagram and Twitter. Our newsletter is frankly the best way to find out what we're up to. We do that every 2 weeks. And we highlight faculty that we work with, projects that we work with, events that we're doing like this one. You guys ever heard of the Consumer Electronics Show, CES? I know Reed has. CES, biggest trade show in North America. It's like 300,000 people. I went there just before the pandemic. It was so amazing to be there January of 2020, the last big trade show. I'm going again in a month to talk about smart infrastructure. So these issues are of international relevance, right? So the work that we do has implications to talk about digital infrastructure, broadband, things of that nature, physical infrastructure, bridges falling, right? So right after that, we had a panel talking about smart infrastructure and some of the work that we do here at Carnegie Mellon that can address that, nonprofits that are in that space. Are we ready to go or not yet? Okay, I can just keep talking. Okay, so yeah, so as I said earlier, we're always looking for interns, research assistants. It's kind of a combination of some of the work that we do that is very hands-on. So if we have funding, so we will often be embedded in projects with faculty around the campus, like engineering, computer science, but also architecture, design, human-computer interaction. Policy definitely is important. And if you're interested in getting some of that hands-on experience, especially if you're looking for a way to network with folks in that field, it's a great way. So I'm giving a pitch for being an intern. Okay, questions?
That's
yes,
a good way for people to learn about. I know handshake.
Yeah, we do handshake. So we'll be posting thank you for your question. We'll be posting online on Handshake. Our website will have that. We will, if you subscribe to our newsletter, we will post that as well. That's a good pitch. So there's lots of ways, and then there's always email, or that works too. So yeah, it's 10 hours a week. I'm really you guys know, school comes first. I'm a mom, so school comes first. But then if you have time, we'd love to bring you in to work with us. Are we ready? All right. Okay. So now I am so thrilled. You can see my friend Bill in the wings there. We're thrilled to have you, Bill. I'm on the board of the Metro Lab Network with Bill. I've gotten to know him over the past 5 years. He is the most humble guy. He's so soft-spoken, so sweet. But you read his resume and you're like, damn, he's done a lot. He is he's a rural guy. He was born in rural upstate New York, but has since flown many places and been many places, including he was the mayor of Ventura, California, and the director of planning and development in the city of San Diego. He has written, I don't know how many books, at least 5. The most recent one is the one we're going to talk about today. And I'm thrilled to, and most recently, he was the head of the Kinder Institute, which is at Rice University. Rice helped form the Metro Lab Network, which is a actually international network of city, municipal and university collaborations, much like Metro21. So he was part of that first group that went to the White House when Obama was president to launch this collaboration. He recently left and he's senior advisor to PFM Management and Budget Consulting, and he's also a fellow at the Terner Center for Housing Innovation at UC Berkeley. So he's got a wealth of experience. He's so kind and sweet, and he's going to give this amazing talk. I hope we can hear you perfectly. And then we are going to have time for questions. So please, we'll reserve at least the last 15 minutes for Q&A. So I'll moderate the questions and with my help of my interns and to do the questions from here. But those of you in the interweb online, put your questions in the chat and we'll make sure we get those as well. And with that, Bill, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And I think I can share my screen now. Is that right?
Yeah, we can we see you? No.
Oh, I can't do it yet. I cannot share my screen while the other participant is sharing. Oh, I see. We had to get that off first. Okay. All right. Here we go. Hello, everybody. Yes. Hello, everybody. I'm Bill Fulton. It's a delight to be here. I worked, Karen said, I worked at Rice for 8 years, and Rice is very much a peer institution to Carnegie Mellon. So it's wonderful to be here. In fact, usually when I wanted somebody to do something at Rice, I would just say, well, Carnegie Mellon's doing it, and that would get their attention. I want to talk a little bit about this book that I just published called Place and Prosperity, How Cities Help Us to Connect and Innovate. And you can see how to order it here on the screen, and you can even get a discount code. So everybody take a picture of the screen right now. Yeah, I'll come back to that. I'll come back to that at the end. This book is a pretty personal book in a certain way, and I'm going to talk about that. But I talk both about my own experiences as what I call an urbanist, to coming to appreciate place and understanding the role that economic development plays in creating the prosperity of communities, and also about how those things are interconnected and how those things shaped me. So let me begin by saying, I have spent a lot of time in my career working on economic development. I used to work for a governing magazine, which is the leading magazine on state and local government in the country. And they used to call me the panacea editor because they would say that my assignment was to go out and talk about the latest economic development fad, whether it's a stadium or a convention center or an auto assembly plant, and talk about how it is not the the panacea for economic growth. In fact, one time I went to the former VW plant outside of Pittsburgh, near Greensburg, and talked about how that was not the panacea. It eventually became a Motorola plant, and now it's an industrial park. But the more I thought about economic development as a journalist and also as a practitioner, the more I thought about, frankly, my hometown and the relationship between the sense of place we often have in strong association to a particular location and the prosperity of that location. This is my hometown. I didn't actually grow up in a rural area. I grew up in a city of 30,000 people, Auburn, New York. It's kind of near Cornell. And this is not quite what it looked like when I was a kid, because this was a little bit before I was born. But this is pretty much what it looked like when I grew up. And the interesting thing, Auburn was a factory town, like many of the towns in Western Pennsylvania. It was sustained by a variety of manufacturing plants, and it had a very robust and vibrant little downtown. But interestingly enough, everything happened in the downtown, even apparently advertisements for Pepsi. But one of the things I say in the book is that what I recall is, as a kid, is that Every store was downtown. Every doctor was downtown. Most of the schools were downtown. Everything I could possibly need to do was downtown. Even our little 5 and dimes, W.T. Grant there on the left, that was a chain, a very prominent chain of stores. So it was a very tight-knit town, not only socially, as many of the manufacturing towns in Western Pennsylvania were, with a strong ethnic population surrounding the factories, but it was also very literally tight knit. You can see most of the town dated back to the 19th century. Very small, narrow streets, very compact downtown, and so forth. And over on the left, and the upper corner on the left is actually a state prison, which is located adjacent to the downtown. Not very common, but it was built by the prisoners themselves in 1820. So I thought a lot about the fact that that the little town that I grew up in, a thriving manufacturing town at the time, was a vibrant place. But it took me a long time before, and a lot of thought about this economic development stuff, writing for governing and doing other things, before I understood that the vibrant place was the result of and deeply interconnected to local prosperity. So, for example, this was the biggest factory in my hometown. This was Columbian Rope Company, the second largest rope manufacturing plant in the world. Literally, the twine went all the way around the building. It literally went all the way around the building as it turned into rope. It had its own kind of beauty associated with rope making, and it had its own R&D lab. So there were many prominent chemists in this little town who worked for this R&D lab, and that R&D lab was actually run by my grandfather. That's a picture of my grandfather, who was the head of research for Columbian Rope, and helped actually strengthen rope significantly, which helped win the World War II in the Pacific, which is, so that was quite something. So there were all these, even though it was a vibrant little town and seemed very parochial, there were all these raw materials going in and manufacturing materials going out every day, very similar to the manufacturing towns in Pennsylvania. And one of the things I never really noticed, although I think for those of you who are from Pennsylvania, you will understand, the connection I made later in life elsewhere in upstate New York, wherever there was a lovely, you know this in the Pittsburgh area, there are small towns where the downtown is really beautiful and vibrant, and there are small towns where the downtown is dead or is decaying. And wherever there was a lovely downtown, I observed in upstate New York, this is Green, New York, which is near Binghamton, not far from the North Pennsylvania border, in a different part of the state from you. Wherever there was a lovely downtown, there was usually a thriving factory not far away. This is a forklift factory, which is very successful, located just a few blocks literally from this old downtown. So one of the things I began to think about as I became an urban planner and economic development specialist was this relationship between the strong sense of place we often have in towns like this, which are common in the Northeast and the Midwest, and the question of prosperity, and what the relationship and the interconnection is between this sense of place and the prosperity that we see. So then I reflected on my own history and what happened to this tight-knit little town. What happened to this tight-knit little town, as was the case with many cities, was urban renewal. This is what it began to look like when urban renewal came in. Two different things happened. One was that half the downtown got torn down to make way for urban renewal, and the other thing that happened was that the New York State Department of Transportation built an arterial highway right through the middle of the downtown. That pretty much ruined about half the town, much more than you would expect, and it caused for me what I always call this is the experience in my childhood and my teenage years that led me to become an urban planner. This is what I call my urban renewal PTSD. That the town I grew up in went from looking like this, within a matter of a couple of years when I was a teenager to looking like this. And as with many cities in the Northeast and the Midwest, there was really no market demand to replace all the buildings that were lost. And so you never really saw very much redevelopment occur. It was only years later, as I said, that I realized I had experienced urban renewal PTSD. This is a picture of our most beloved building downtown being torn down in the 1970s. And recently this was posted on the Facebook page for my hometown and got literally thousands of comments. So this was my experience as a kid that led me to think about urbanism. So what did I do? I moved as far away as possible to a place that didn't seem urban. I hope that everybody recognizes what this picture is. This is a picture from the air of Los Angeles. This is the city I moved to in my 20s, and it certainly it was prosperous, but it certainly didn't seem urban. It didn't have this kind of little tight-knit stuff anywhere. It all looked like this, big post-war endless subdivisions and so forth. But it turned out that even in a place like Los Angeles, there were great urban bones, as there are in most older cities. This is downtown Pasadena, California, a suburb of Los Angeles, and this, of course, is downtown Santa Monica. Both of these locations are very expensive now, but they are examples of, in Los Angeles, Los Angeles has a series of small urban downtowns that are really quite wonderful, many of which have come back and prospered anew in the last, 20 years. I think for those of you who, I realize not all of you grew up in the Pittsburgh area, but if you have, you might be able to relate to some of the stuff I'm saying about the decline and the rise of cities, and particularly around strong places and strong neighborhoods and strong downtowns. Soon I found another small city with a good downtown. This is Ventura, California, where I lived for 25 years, where I was on the city council and I was the mayor. This is Main Street in downtown Ventura. And the thing that really struck me was that it looked and functioned a lot like other downtowns I'd seen, especially the one in my hometown. And guess what? It was a few blocks away from a very thriving company. You see the buildings that you see down on the bottom of this picture. That's the corporate headquarters of Patagonia. I think I'm wearing a Patagonia jacket actually right now. That's the corporate headquarters of Patagonia that is on the edge of downtown Ventura. And actually, when you think about the relationship between place and prosperity and why some places prosper and some don't, very often it is because of some amenity or natural quality that the area has. If you look at the top of this picture, you see not just the Pacific Ocean, but actually one of the best surfing spots on the West Coast. And the reason Patagonia is where it is on the bottom of this picture is because Yvon Chouinard, who was the founder of Patagonia, loved to surf, and he wanted to be close to the beach. So again, there's a relationship between the strong sense of place that we see in a place like this and prosperity. In fact, Patagonia for many years has had in its advertisements in its job ads has always said surfing at lunchtime being one of the amenities. So I came to realize that the most basic reason cities exist is to bring people together, and not just for daily living and culture, which is what we urban planners always think we're doing, but for perhaps most important, to facilitate commerce. When you have a location with a strong sense of place, where people can interact with each other easily, where they have access to amenities and makes them want to be there, that is often where innovation occurs. We've seen that in Silicon Valley. We've actually seen that around Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh, and we've seen that around MIT in Cambridge, et cetera. And I also saw how other people also experience PTSD. I put PSTT, but it's PTSD. And how you can actually heal it in a way that makes cities better. This is San Francisco, and obviously not a current picture, but the most prominent feature in this picture is the Embarcadero Freeway, which was built in a way that separated the Embarcadero and San Francisco Bay from downtown San Francisco. As you can see, the huge separation. And if you look at the building there with the clock tower on it, that's the ferry building. That's where all the ferries come into San Francisco, where people who commute by ferry go to downtown San Francisco. So they had to walk underneath this gigantic freeway just to go to work. And the whole area became very decrepit, and the ferry building, which is a beautiful building, became very, as I say, became decrepit and run down. Then something interesting happened. There was a natural occurrence that occurred about 30 years ago. There was a large earthquake, the Loma Prieta earthquake, and it knocked this freeway down. And the city of San Francisco decided that instead of rebuilding the freeway, they would leave it torn down and replace it with a boulevard. And this is what the Embarcadero looks like today. And you can see the ferry building right there. This has generated a tremendous renaissance of activity right along the boulevard there. Traffic moves reasonably well along the boulevard, but you can see it is one of the most popular places in San Francisco now. And it is a place where and that ferry building is now one of the most successful commercial and retail buildings in San Francisco. I should note that this idea of overcoming one's urban PTSD and reclaiming and healing has become very popular with the current presidential administration. Transportation Secretary Buttigieg, himself a former mayor, as you know, of a college town of South Bend, Indiana, where Notre Dame is located, has prioritized these kinds of projects and is trying to push federal money out to assist cities that actually want to tear down their freeways, build boulevards, and reclaim their cities the way it happens here. One of the things I've been doing is trying to spend a little bit of time working with a city neighboring to my hometown, Syracuse, New York, which is trying to remove the viaduct for its interstate freeway that goes right through the downtown. So what happened after that? I went to a city with no zoning. I now live in Houston because I worked at Rice University. I can't say that every single family home in Houston is adjacent to a roller coaster, but I will say that it is not uncommon to have weird juxtaposition. And Houston did challenge my whole idea that place and prosperity go together. Houston's always been a very prosperous city, but it has not always been a high quality place. Houston's always been kind of utilitarian and workmanlike, and it's been the kind of place where it is not a place that has always valued high quality neighborhoods and high quality places. And yet over time, it focused on making money. And yet over time, Houston has invested a lot of that money back into places. And if they haven't had much respect for pedestrians either. This is an actual picture of an actual sign on the Rice campus that you're supposed to watch out for cars so that they don't hit you. So the idea of walkable places in particular has not been highly valued in Houston. And yet, as Houston has become richer and more prosperous, it has invested more in its public spaces and more in its sense of place, to the point where place matters to many people, even where I didn't think it was valued here in Houston. This is Buffalo Bayou Park, immediately adjacent to downtown Houston, as you can see. So not all good places are prosperous, and not all prosperous places are well designed. But I do think that if you have good place bones, then that will facilitate prosperity. This is what my hometown looked like when I was a kid. You can see the prison there in the background. This is what my hometown looked like as a kid, and it was very prosperous and very walkable. This is what that same corner looks like today. This is one of the most prominent breweries in the Northeast that has led a renaissance to the parts of downtown, at least, that didn't get torn down. So I do think, even though place and prosperity don't always go together, prosperity will usually generate good places eventually. And when prosperity emerges, it will find its way to the good places. And this is still my favorite street, I have to say. It has a strong sense of place, a strong sense of walkability. It's the heart and soul of my adopted downtown of Ventura, California. It's a place where you can close it off to welcome back a hometown boy. It's a place where you can have celebrate an inflatable green pig on St. Patrick's Day. This is in the St. Patrick's Day parade. This actually, tragically, one year as this float was passing in front of the judging station, the green pig deflated. And so they actually buried him, and now they have another one. But the point I want to make about this street is that it's extremely flexible. It can be open to traffic. It can be closed to special events like the one here with Kevin Costner, who grew up in Ventura. It can be closed for a parade. And now it's closed permanently after COVID for restaurants and outdoor dining. So I'm very proud of the fact that this city, which I played an important role in for a long time, has reinvented, and the downtown has reinvented itself as a center of both place and prosperity. And as I say, place and prosperity don't always go together, but usually prosperity creates good places, as was the case a long time ago in Pittsburgh, and eventually it can help form the basis for a revival of prosperity. So that's all I really wanted to say about place and prosperity. I know Karen's got some questions, and I know you all got some questions, so I will leave it there. And I guess I'll stop sharing my screen now. Okay, Karen, is that all right?
Well, let's make sure everyone has a chance to.
All right, let's leave this on a little bit longer.
Yeah,
okay?
yeah. So I have good Christmas, Hanukkah gifts to share with your friends. The book with a 20% discount. I do welcome questions from the audience. First, let's give our speaker a round of applause.
Thank you.
And I've forgotten your roots. I'm thinking of where you're going back right now in your Woodstock. So because I worked with Florida, and his whole theme about the creative class. Do you guys know anybody? Any hands? No, heard? Okay, I know, you know. Okay, a few. So this whole idea that to create a place you want to attract, you want to have climbing walls, you want to have all these accoutrements, if you will, of a creative class, and that by itself will help bring prosperity. I have so many opinions about it, but I'd love to hear your thought on it. And yes, you're being recorded. I am thoughtful.
Well,
time has also passed since he is, 25 years have passed since he came up with that thesis.
Well, Richard's thesis has been both supported and attacked by lots and lots of people over the last 20 to 25 years. I do think that in a world where our cities are competing with each other more for talent than they used to, this question of a strong sense of place has become more and more important. And I'll give you a story from Houston to emphasize that. It used to be in many cities that if you wanted to be active in a certain industry, you had to go to a particular city, and you basically had no choice. And so therefore, the quality of the place didn't matter as much. So for example, it's still true, of course, that you go to Washington for politics, New York for finance, and LA for entertainment. And you often go to San Francisco or in Silicon Valley for tech. In the old days, if you wanted to do steel in your life, you went to Pittsburgh. And of course, it's still also true that if you want to be in the energy industry, and especially the oil and gas industry, you go to Houston. So interestingly enough, for 100 years, if you were a petroleum engineer, for example, and you wanted to work in the oil and gas industry, you basically had to move to Houston to get ahead. There was no choice. There really were no competitors. And so talent attraction was not a problem. Interestingly enough, if I can skim back, I'm going to skim back to the picture of Buffalo Bayou Park. Interestingly enough, this park was recently renovated with a $50 million gift from local philanthropists, Rich and Nancy Kinder, who are oil pipeline billionaires. And I once asked, I did a public interview kind of like this with Rich Kinder, and I asked him, why was this so important to you? You're an oil guy. And his answer was, oil and gas, like so many other industries, is now much more dependent on technology than it used to be, which means that Houston is in competition for talent with Austin, with Seattle, with San Francisco. And therefore, the quality of place has become extremely important in attracting critical pieces of the workforce. And without that quality of place, given that competition, instead of coming to Houston and working on energy technology, they'll go to New York and work on fintech, or they'll go to LA and work on high technology entertainment. It doesn't really matter. And so I do think that Florida's basic argument that you have to have high amenity places in order to attract a class of workers that drive the economy, I think that is fundamentally true. Rich has been criticized for focusing too much on what seems to be fluffy stuff and not enough on blue collar economies and so forth. But I think there's no question that this kind of stuff drives local economies in the ways that benefits other people as well, people who work in factories, people who are service workers, et cetera.
Well, a park is a great example of that because that's meant to be open to everyone, no matter.
Yes, that's
where
right.
you come from or what
Right.
you do.
And the flip side of that, though, is that this park is in a very affluent part of town, which became far more affluent when the park was rebuilt, right? Same thing with Central Park in New York and so forth. So that's a fundamental, it's open to everybody. It is more immediately accessible to affluent folks than to others.
True. Location matters. Any questions from the audience? Okay, great. Yeah, go ahead. Introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Jacob. I'm a second year here at the Hines Policy Program. I'm actually interning at the Economic Development Administration as we speak. So I'm really interested in the federal policies that you mentioned. You specifically talked about the Department of Transportation's Reconnecting Communities program.
Yes, yes.
But I think I'm really interested to see, like, what are other ideas that you have kind of across the interagency, across, maybe commerce, USDA, any of those other major departments? What are other programs that you're seeing that are working, or what are programs that you'd like to see?
I'd like to see the Reconnecting program have a couple of big wins. There have been a couple of places in the country where in urban areas, small portions of freeway have been torn down and successfully replaced with good neighborhoods. One of the things I've been doing recently is examining all the programs located that are housed within the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, and also the IIJA, which is the infrastructure law. And I think one of the things, a couple of things. One is that, as you may know, the Biden administration has an overarching executive order called Justice 40, which is designed to make sure that federal economic development and infrastructure programs, 40% of them benefit low-income communities. But I think that in Houston, for example, we think a lot about resilience. We're at risk for flooding and hurricanes. And so one of the things that all these federal programs put together can begin to do is create a neighborhood resiliency hubs where there's a reliable source of power. If your power runs out, they'll be high enough that they don't get flooded, things like that. Those are sometimes called lily pads. So I think what the cities have to do is figure out, there's a lot of new federal programs, there's a lot of federal money floating around for the next few years. I think what cities have to do is figure out, as they always have to figure out, how to take those programs and combine them across domains and tailor them for the benefit of communities. Because as I always say, you walk out your front door and you don't see a DOT highway, and you don't see an EPA stormwater project, and you don't see a HUD housing project, you see your community. And so the trick at the local level is to figure out how to bring those programs together and work across domains to make them work.
Any other questions from the audience? Okay, great. Yeah.
All right. So,
Introduce yourself again.
hi, my name is Neville. I am a student at the Department of Civil Engineering, and so prior to COVID, you'd get hired, and then that you'd have to really move from your city to wherever you're hired, right? And so during COVID, I think that forced people to reinvent the marketplace and the approach to search, right? And so currently, what I'm seeing, even with people that have been hired from CMU that I know of, is that you get these tech jobs from Silicon Valley, but you do not have to physically move to Silicon Valley because now it's possible for you to work from wherever you are at, right? And so I understand that urbanization and then the uprising of New York, Dallas, Austin, Houston, and even San Francisco was really a product of people moving to these cities for employment, right? And now we're starting to see this trend after COVID, where people don't physically have to move, but then they can still work for Apple and Google and Tesla and the likes. So what do you think might be the consequence of that in, continuing this urbanization thing?
Yeah, I think the most important trend that we don't know the outcome of about cities in the future is what is the impact of remote work going to be? I think it's likely that most office work will be hybrid, maybe 3 and 2. And so in many cases, people will still have to live in some proximity to where their job is located. I think that's probably more common than complete remote. Having said that, I will say, and I live in Houston, I spent a lot of time in Austin. And even though you can work remotely for tech companies, Austin is booming and people are coming into Austin every day. And it's partly because of economic opportunity. It's partly because of the jobs. It's partly because of the vibe, and it's partly because they just want to live there. So part of what will happen is that we will live someplace not because we have to, but because we want to. And that makes amenities more important. One of the things I think is going to happen is that this will lead to more economic activity and prosperity in the second tier cities that are less expensive, Pittsburgh being an example of one of those cities. If you don't have to live in San Francisco and you can live in Pittsburgh, actually there was an article in the New York Times not long ago about somebody who bailed from Brooklyn to Pittsburgh during COVID. Because it was a lot cheaper, but they also found many of the same urban place amenities that they had found in Brooklyn. I think the second tier cities are going to prosper, partly because of remote work, and I think that is going to be the big story. And Richard Florida has sort of identified the same possible trend, that the big cities which have experienced a renaissance stopped having population growth around 2016. Whereas the second tier cities have continued to grow. So if you look at all of the cities, I did this the other day, I haven't published anything on it yet, but if you look at all the cities in the country that have a population of 500,000 or more, during COVID, those cities jointly lost about 600,000 people. Basically, all of those people went from New York and San Francisco and DC and Boston and LA. The second tier cities have all done fine. So I think we're going to see less of a dominance on the part of the very large cities and a continued renaissance in the second tier cities.
Can I do a corollary question to that? I'm curious about, because of this rise of hybrid, this retainment of hybrid, many midtowns, like in New York City, for example, are suffering. Office buildings are vacant, and the restaurants and the scene, the bars and everything, the everything that would support them, the dry cleaners, etc., are also out of business or have left. What are your thoughts about converting that office building into housing, and which is happening? Is that the right, as putting on your planner hat, is that the right course of action, or is this just, people also predicted that New York City was dead 2 years ago. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, I will say that places like Midtown Manhattan are not going to be as dead as everybody thought they were going to be 2 years ago, right? There is some activity there. It's pretty close to back to normal Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. There will definitely be a new normal in business districts like that. But I would say two things about office dominated business districts in the future. One is that they're going to have to accommodate a wide range of more diverse activities in order to attract people. Another thing I would say about the future, about the post-COVID future, is that we no longer have to go to an office every day just to sit there and do work. We go to an office or a central location in order to interact with each other and do work together, right? And there's something irreplaceable about that. All this fall, I went over to Austin on Thursdays and I taught at the LBJ school, the equivalent of the Heinz School at University of Texas. And that quality of interaction with those students was irreplaceable. Having said that, so formerly office dominated business districts are going to have to convert to a wide variety of other activities. I think you will see more hotels. It's a little easier to convert office buildings into hotels than into apartments. You will see a lot of conversion into apartments. And a lot of that depends on the building and its size and the size of the floor plate. Old office buildings have smaller floor plates, so it's easier to cut them up into residential units that have windows. Newer office buildings have gigantic floor plates to accommodate those, those mills of workers who worked in cells or in cubicles, cubicle mills, you might call them. And those are much harder to convert into residential because of the large floor plates and because of the predominance of interior space. So I think you'll see some of that. You're going to see some conversion to residential. You're going to see some conversion to hotel. You're going to see some conversion to shared workspace and meetings, and particularly meeting space and things like that. But we are going to wind up with a large number of older, and you'll see office tenants moving to the nicest possible space they can because it's now going to be cheaper and there's less demand. Having said that, there's still going to be a lot of old office buildings that are unsuitable for any of those things that we're not quite sure what we're going to do with. And I think that's the biggest problem for downtowns and business districts. But you'll get back 70-75% of what you had before in a place like Midtown Manhattan. There'll be a shakeout. I do think that you will also see more interesting restaurants and things like that in suburban areas where people live, because they're going to expect that now near where Applebee's isn't going to be enough where they live. They're going to expect that now in the suburbs, whereas they used to rely on it for lunch in the city or whatever.
Questions? Any more questions? Yeah, in the back. Oh, wait. Well, one in the back and one in the back. Okay, to you.
Hi, my name is Sarah, and I'm actually a former urban planner in a city. And so kind of when you're discussing what makes the downtown vital, you're kind of tight urban cores, storefronts, all of those good things. A normative assumption about what makes a downtown.
I'm having a little more trouble hearing you than I heard the previous questioners. So. And there's a lot of background noise too.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, that's much better. Thank you.
So yeah, I'm a former urban planner in a town, that's kind of like yours. And so when you were showing us pictures of what you thought made a downtown vital, you're showing these, tight urban cores, storefronts, yes. Kind of a new urbanistic vision, which in some ways is a normative assumption, right, about what makes a city vital.
Yes, you're right, it is.
Yeah, but at the same time, like during urban renewal, policymakers also thought that raising downtowns, constructing highways was a normatively good thing and would revitalize communities. So as we have ARPA dollars, economic development dollars, I'm kind of curious how you think like the trendiness of these normative assumptions how we should invest or reinvest in communities.
I'm not saying that we should eliminate all suburbs and everybody should live in a tight downtown. what I am saying is that dense activity districts have been shown throughout history as being places not only that people like, at least for certain things, but that are vital for commerce. Now, one could argue that, and therefore related to prosperity, one could argue that in the post-COVID world, everything has blown apart, and actual physical proximity to each other isn't as important as it used to be. That may be true in some cases. As I said, intense human physical interaction has many benefits. We've seen that in the innovation. We've seen that proven in the innovation economy. I would also say that, throughout the entire era of telecommunications, we have repeatedly heard that place won't matter anymore and distance won't matter anymore. The precursor to the internet was the telegraph, which was invented became widely used in the 1840s. It's 175 years ago, and contemporary. It's now sometimes referred to as the Victorian internet, and it was widely believed at the time that the telegraph would annihilate time and space. That was a term they frequently used in those days. In fact, in many cases, the presence of the telegraph concentrated information and concentrated commercial activity in particular locations, such as, for example, the financial district of central London. So therefore I think place and proximity and dense activity districts will continue to play an important role in commerce and in prosperity. Obviously, it's not the only kind of place that creates that. And I'm not naive enough to believe that everything and everybody has to be located in those districts. I would say that, but I would say that dense activity districts, while normative now, have been proven throughout history as being successful, whereas the urban renewal and urban highway construction of about 2 generations ago could better be viewed as a brand new experiment that didn't work out the way we expected. So I don't think that the ideas I'm proposing are as faddishly normative as they seem. I think they are grounded in history and grounded in a lot of experience about what makes cities prosperous.
There's a question here. Then I don't know if there's anything else here. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, very well.
Hello, thank you so much for this. I'm Jess. I'm with the Center for Shared Prosperity, and I think we were thinking along somewhat similar lines, maybe with our questions around whose definition of prosperity and community really gets to be centered. So, as kind of listening to this question, to the questions that were being asked around what's attractive to folks and moving to cities. I was thinking a lot about the folks who don't have that luxury of being able to move from city to city based on what's interesting to them and where they want to be. They're sort of don't have that ability to move around in that same way. And so how do we, when planning cities, when considering prosperity, really center their needs in that? And I'll take it maybe one step further and think about what is what is then the role of anchor institutions like our universities in centering the needs of the people who live in our cities, and especially in a place like Pittsburgh, who are the folks that don't get to move around, who have been here long-term, thinking similarly in Austin, the folks out in East Austin. How do we center them in a lot of this development of place and prosperity?
I think one of the biggest questions we currently face is how do we make sure that the kind of prosperity that is generated by urban areas of the kinds I've described actually is shared and beneficial to most people. In my opinion, part of that, the problem, in my opinion, there's a larger issue of inequity in our society, which is reflected in the urban environment and cannot cannot be solved entirely by urban policy or placemaking. I do think we need to make sure that people, no matter where they live, have access to the kinds of place amenities that I'm talking about. In part because of the inequity that I described. It's a tricky balance because on the one hand, you have to support the drivers of prosperity, but on the other hand, you have to make sure that prosperity is shared, and that's much more difficult than it used to be. In my experience, in my hometown, in my childhood and my teenage years, the downtown was for everybody. It was not far away from anybody. It was not especially expensive to go to, and that has changed dramatically. So I think that one of the reasons I mentioned, I responded about the federal programs the way I did, was because I do think that there is tremendous opportunity on the part of federal programs to be combined in a way that can strengthen placemaking and hopefully prosperity in some underserved neighborhoods. But I do think that on the one hand, it's easy to simply, as you said, focus the question of prosperity on overall general wealth creation and economic growth. On the other hand, it is hard in a world that is so unequal to try to figure out how one slice of humanity, that is to say cities and urban policy, can overcome that entire set of inequality. That's a pretty big question that I think sometimes urbanists can't solve all by themselves.
I think it speaks to the role of policy and intentional policy making. And you were talking about the funding coming from the Fed, like this intentional shining of a light on this inequity and saying we are going to fund these things because we value more equitable distribution, and our money is going to focus on that. And that's the role of policy that's informing those decisions. And so that's why the work that we do here at Carnegie Mellon is so important. I'll just put that plug in. Donner, you had a question. Yes.
Hi, and I want to first say thank you, Bill, for coming. And when I was seeing the pictures of Auburn, it reminded me I was recently driving through Nyack, New York, which has a really nice main street. And I kind of see this parallel with like when you use urban also as like kind of like Main Street, because it's like the urban area of these smaller cities and towns. And so when these main streets are being revitalized, how do you see the conflict between bringing in these name brands like Lululemon, having more of like a local area where you can have some cosmopolitan localism, local shops and urban farm type idea? How do you see that? Because I see a place like Houston, probably we're going to bring in more of the name time brands versus how you get these small towns to attract people and have that local circulation of money without attracting people just with names.
Well, I think there are a couple of different questions in there. One is the last thing you said, which is how do you make sure a maximum amount of money gets circulated locally? But the other one is if you have a activity district, how do you make sure that it is not overwhelmed by chains and it has an authentic experience? And I think that this is policy can play a role in this, but in many cases it's simply you simply have to have intention on the part of the developers and the landowners. You're quite right about Houston, although I recently toured and I'm writing a kind of a book excerpt for Next City about this, about a neighborhood where a group of, I called them ragtag developers, but not extremely well-funded development guys, have bought a bunch of property, but they are deliberately trying to make sure that the businesses they put in are locally owned and serve local needs. I think one of the biggest problems that we see, particularly as a result of this inequality, is that once you create a place that appears to be a successful place, then the high-end businesses go in and the tourists or the well-heeled locals arrive. And so people from underserved neighborhoods or people who don't have very many options feel shut out. They don't feel like it's theirs. And I think one of the things that cities have to do as part of their policy is work with developers and private interests to make sure that that the businesses that are there are authentic, that reflect the community, and actually seem welcoming to everybody. I think one of the biggest problems with gentrification is not just the displacement of longtime residents and businesses, but the arrival of businesses that do not make local residents feel welcome. So if you can find a way to mix that up a little bit, rather than just always succumbing to the what they call the national credit retailers, I think that's a necessary part of this. It does, and it has the potential to create a virtuous cycle of prosperity as well, for the reasons you described. Not only is the money staying in the local economy, but those entrepreneurs, if they are successful, can expand and become even more successful to the benefit of everyone.
Maybe time for one more question. Is there anything from the audience? Oh, Reed, go for it. We'll get you a mic. Is there anything from the audience? No, I don't think so. All right.
Thank you. Bill, thank you for your comments.
Sure.
My name is Reed. I work in the technology transfer office here at Carnegie Mellon.
Mm-hmm.
Involved in the very urban focused new economy creation.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm from a small town in Pennsylvania, very similar to your hometown. And probably similar changes there. Walmart came to town, downtown retail suffered. And in the manufacturing side, like most of the manufacturing companies in my town were started by entrepreneurs in that town.
Yes, long ago, right? Same thing.
They were acquired by national companies, international companies.
Yep.
Money was bled out of them. They offshored jobs. And that resulted in less opportunity and brain drain, including myself, because there wasn't an opportunity in that town. So I left.
Right.
And where's the next generation of entrepreneurs come from in these small towns? And what models have you seen to help promote creation of prosperity through manufacturing, entrepreneurial support in small towns?
Well, I will say, generally speaking, I think we are on the verge of a true manufacturing renaissance, because we see many non-economic reasons associated with wanting to manufacture things domestically, either because of supply chain issues. The Pentagon is very focused on that. I will say the next generation of manufacturing entrepreneurs in my hometown came from the people who already lived there and worked there, and didn't want to, and either didn't want to move with their manufacturing company or just started something up. There was a lot of a typical attempt in the 90s, especially, to attract big manufacturing companies in. That worked to a certain extent. They didn't always stay. But what we see now is, what I would say about my hometown is people have been making stuff there for 200 years and they like it. And the quality of life in the town has become attractive enough that enough people stay or move back and become manufacturing entrepreneurs. To my astonishment, Auburn, which is a city of 28,000 people, exports about $1 billion worth of manufactured goods per year, which is punching way above its weight. And I think that is largely because people like you and me are more likely than they were back then to either never leave or, more commonly, decide that's the lifestyle they want and they want to move back. So there's a lifestyle associated with that kind of town, which is important in attracting entrepreneurs that are committed to a particular place. I've seen that over and over again in Auburn, my hometown, where people have come back there. They went off into the world. They came back. They like the lifestyle. It is a small town lifestyle, but they still have this pretty concentrated area that everything occurs in, even though it's not all downtown. And they want to start and expand manufacturing companies that start out small. And of course, the manufacturing companies don't employ nearly as many people as they used to. But nevertheless, there is a stronger manufacturing economy there than you might think. And I think that there is a next generation of, I didn't used to believe this, but I think there is a next generation of manufacturing entrepreneurs in a lot of these cities, if the place amenities are strong enough and if the quality of life is good enough.
I absolutely agree. This was fantastic. We've hit the top of the hour. These guys are getting ready for finals and final projects, so we're going to end on time. Let's give another round of applause.
Thank you.
You were fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Karen.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Make sure we have your slides. We'll make sure we have all those links.
Yeah.
This is recorded, and happy holidays.
Happy holidays to you. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.